What makes a mother look into her own child's eyes and decide that that life needs to end? What goes through a father's mind when he chooses to be the executioner of the one he should protect? This is not an easy question to ask, much less to answer. But that's exactly why you need to hear what I'm going to tell you today. There is a type of crime that goes beyond any logic we can comprehend. We're not talking about murders for money, revenge, or accumulated hatred. We're talking about something much deeper, much more disturbing. We're talking about fathers and mothers who take the lives of their own children. And no, this doesn't only happen in horror movies or in news from distant countries. It happens here, close to you, more often than anyone would like to admit. In June 2001, a woman named Andrea Yates woke up as the mother of 5 children. By the end of that day, she had become one of the most shocking murderers in American criminal history. Andrea didn't use a weapon. She didn't use poison. She used water, an ordinary bathtub in the house where those children played, ate, and slept. One by one, she called each child. The oldest was only 7 years old, the youngest, 6 months old, and one by one, she held them underwater until they stopped moving. Then, with a calmness that defies comprehension, she placed the 5 bodies on the bed side by side, covered each one with a sheet, and called the police. When asked what had happened, Andrea said without hesitation, "I killed my children." The first reaction anyone has upon hearing this is one of revulsion, of disbelief. How? How is it possible for a mother to do this? How can a woman who carried those children in her womb, who breastfed them, who cared for them, reach this point? And that's where most people stop. Because it's easier to call her a monster and move on than to truly try to understand. But if you're here, it's because you don't want the easy answer. You want the truth. And the truth about cases, like Andrea Yates's, is far more complex and far more frightening than simply saying she was evil. Because Andrea didn't wake up one day and decide to kill. She wasn't a heartless psychopath. She was a broken, sick woman in such a deteriorated mental state that her reality had long since ceased to make sense. And the most disturbing thing of all, she believed she was doing the right thing. In her mind, at that moment, killing her children was an act of love, of salvation. It seems impossible, I know. But that's exactly what happens when psychosis takes over. The line between protection and destruction disappears completely. If you're wondering how someone reaches this point, if you're trying to understand what the signs are, what kind of mind is capable of something like this, then stay with me. Because today I'm going to open the minds of murderers like Andrea Yates and show you, clearly and without beating around the bush, how the psychology behind filicide works. We're going to delve deep into the most shocking cases, understand the profiles, the triggers, the patterns, and believe me, when you finish watching, you'll never look at this type of crime the same way again. But before we continue, I need something from you. If this type of content interests you, if you truly want to understand what goes on behind these minds, leave a comment below telling me, have you heard of the Andrea Yates case before? What do you think drives someone to that point? Also, leave a like on the video, because that shows me you want more in-depth analyses like this. And if you're not already subscribed, subscribe now, because every week I bring a new case, a new analysis, always dissecting the darker side of criminal psychology. Hit the bell so you don't miss anything. Okay? So let's continue. Now that you understand the gravity of what happened that June morning, we need to take a step back, because to understand how Andrea got there, to that bathtub, taking the life of each child with her own hands, we need to destroy a myth that has been rooted in our culture for centuries. A myth that, through repetition, has become almost an absolute truth. And this myth is dangerous because it prevents us from seeing the signs when they appear right in front of us. From the moment we are born, there's a narrative that's repeated ad nauseum. You've heard it 1,000 times. A mother's love is unconditional. A father's love is pure protection. It's instinct, it's nature, it's something programmed into the DNA of any human being who creates life. The whole of society relies on this idea, this almost religious certainty that fathers and mothers would never harm their own children. And when something like this happens, when a case like Andrea Yates's comes to light, the first reaction is always the same. This person isn't human. They're a monster, an abomination of nature. But here's the problem. This romantic and simplistic view of parental instinct is not only wrong, it's dangerous. Because when we transform these criminals into monsters, into beings completely separate from humanity, we stop understanding. And when we stop understanding, we can't prevent it. The truth is that the human brain doesn't function solely on instinct. It functions through chemistry, hormones, social pressures, and individual interpretations of reality. And when any of these elements collapse, when the balance breaks down, the unthinkable becomes possible. There's a word for it: Filicide. It comes from Latin, filius meaning son and catere, meaning to kill. It's the technical term for when parents take the lives of their own children. And before you think we're talking about something rare, a statistical anomaly, let me show you the numbers. In the United States, about 500 children are murdered by their own parents every year. 500. That's more than one a day. In Brazil, the data is underreported, like almost everything related to domestic violence. But conservative estimates point to hundreds of cases annually. Cases that are often masked as accidents, as sudden deaths, as inexplicable tragedies. Now think about it. If this happens so frequently, are we really talking about monsters? Or are we talking about ordinary people? People you might pass on the street who work, who smile, who have friends, but who at some point in their lives made the darkest and most irreversible decision a human being can make? The answer is uncomfortable, but it's the second option. And that's precisely why we need to stop romanticizing parental instinct and start understanding how it can fail. Because when you look at real cases, you realize there isn't a single profile. It's not just the psychotic mother. It's not just the violent father. They are people from all social classes, all levels of education, all religions. What they have in common is not pure evil. It's a breakdown, a fracture in the way they see the world, how they process emotions, how they deal with pressure. And this fracture can happen for 1,000 different reasons. Now let's go back to Andrea Yates. Because if we really want to understand how a human mind completely short-circuits, how someone crosses the line that separates sanity from homicidal madness, her case is a complete lesson. And the most terrifying thing of all is that, from the outside, nothing indicated that this was about to happen, at least not to those who didn't know where to look. Andrea was 36 years old when she committed the crime. She was a nurse, a profession that demands care, empathy, and responsibility. She was married to Russell Yates, a man who worked in technology and who, in the eyes of the community, was a present father and a devoted husband. They lived in Texas, attended church regularly, and followed a conservative and intense religious line. 5 children, a house, a routine. From the outside, everything seemed normal. More than normal, it seemed like one of those families you see and think, they have everything under control. But inside, Andrea was falling apart, literally. She suffered from severe postpartum depression, a disorder that goes far beyond the fleeting sadness some women feel after the birth of a child. We're talking about a serious psychiatric condition that completely alters brain chemistry. Andrea had hallucinations. She heard voices, and these voices weren't saying random things. They said she was a terrible mother, that her children were condemned to hell because of her, that the only way to save them was to take them out of this world before it was too late. Andrea attempted suicide twice. She was admitted to psychiatric clinics, received medication, and underwent treatment. Doctors warned her husband. They said she wasn't in a condition to care for so many children, that she needed rest, constant support, that another child could be devastating to her mental health. But Russell Yates insisted. He wanted more children. And Andrea, trapped in a dynamic of religious and emotional submission, became pregnant again and again, until there were 5. Then came June 20th, 2001, a Wednesday morning. Russell left for work as usual. His mother, who sometimes helped Andrea with the children, hadn't arrived yet. And it was during that interval, that window of time when Andrea was alone with her 5 children, that everything fell apart. She didn't act impulsively. She wasn't panicking. On the contrary, she waited, she planned, and she began. She called Noah, the oldest, 7 years old. He entered the bathroom trustingly, as any child trusts their own mother, and Andrea held him underwater until he stopped struggling. Then came John, 5 years old, then Paul, 3, Luke, 2, and finally Mary, a baby of only 6 months. 5 children, 1 bathtub. and a mother who, in her completely broken mind, believed she was performing an act of love. When the police arrived, Andrea was sitting silently. She said with a chilling calm that startled the investigators, "I killed my children." They asked why. Her answer was direct, without hesitation, to save them from the devil. At that moment, in Andrea's mind, she wasn't a murderer. She was a savior. And this distortion of reality is what separates cases like hers from so many others that we will still explore. And here's the part most people refuse to accept, because it's easier to judge than to understand. Andrea wasn't faking it. She didn't invent an excuse after the crime to try to escape prison. She truly, genuinely believed she was doing the right thing. And that doesn't make her any less responsible for what she did, but it completely changes how we need to view what happened in that house. What Andrea had is called postpartum psychosis. It's a rare but absolutely real condition. It happens in approximately 1 to 2 women per 1,000 births. That may seem like a small number, but when you put it into global perspective, we're talking about thousands of cases per year. And postpartum psychosis isn't intense sadness. It isn't anxiety. It isn't extreme fatigue. It's a complete biochemical collapse of the brain. Hormones plummet abruptly after childbirth. Essential neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine become completely dysregulated, and the person literally loses touch with reality. They begin to live in a distorted version of the world, where what is real and what is hallucination become so intertwined that they can no longer separate them. In Andrea's mind, she wasn't killing her children. She was saving them. Think about it. In her logic, completely shattered by illness, if the children died at that moment, while they were still innocent, before they were old enough to truly sin, they would go straight to heaven. They would be safe, protected, free from eternal suffering. But if they continued to live under her care, she who, according to the voices inside her own head, was an inadequate mother, a failed mother, a mother who couldn't do enough, then they would be condemned to hell, condemned to an eternity of pain. And for someone as deeply religious as Andrea, this wasn't a metaphor. It was an absolute certainty. It's a distorted logic, obviously. It's a logic that only makes sense within a completely sick mind. But it is logic. And that's the crucial point that separates cases like Andrea's from so many others we're going to explore. Filicidal murderers don't always act out of pure malice, out of sadism, out of a desire to do evil. Many of them act within a completely broken belief system, where the act of killing transforms, in their minds, into protection, into salvation, into love. And however absurd that may seem to those on the outside, to those inside that distorted reality, it makes perfect sense. The human brain is a powerful machine, but it is also fragile. When its chemistry changes, when the circuits that control emotion, perception, and judgment malfunction, the person ceases to operate in the same reality as the rest of the world. They are not choosing to be crazy. They are not opting to see the world incorrectly. They simply can no longer see it any other way. And that is precisely why ignoring signs of postpartum psychosis, severe depression, or any serious psychiatric disorder during motherhood is so dangerous. Because when the mind breaks down, the unthinkable becomes possible. And no one, absolutely no one, is immune to that. Which leads us to an even more unsettling question. If Andrea represents a specific type of mother who kills, what are the other types? Criminal psychiatrists have dedicated decades to studying hundreds of filicide cases around the world, trying to understand if there is any pattern, any way to classify these crimes in a way that helps both investigation and prevention. And what they discovered is that yes, there are profiles. 5 main profiles, in fact, and each one reveals a completely different motivation, a unique psychological breakdown. Understanding these profiles means understanding that not every parent who kills acts for the same reason, and that changes everything. The first profile is what we call the delusional altruist. Andrea Yates fits perfectly here. These are fathers and mothers who genuinely believe they are protecting their child from something worse. It could be psychosis, it could be extreme depression, it could be religious fanaticism taken to the extreme. But the central point is always the same. In their minds, killing is an act of love, of salvation. They don't see their child as a victim. They see their child as someone who needs to be rescued from an even crueler fate. And this makes these cases especially tragic, because many times they could have been avoided with proper psychiatric treatment. The second profile is the accidental father. This is the type who doesn't plan to kill. He doesn't wake up thinking about it, but in a moment of uncontrollable anger, extreme frustration, absolute exhaustion, he loses control. He shakes the baby too hard. He hits until he doesn't realize he's gone too far. And when he does realize it, it's too late. These cases are usually accompanied by immediate remorse, genuine despair. Not that this diminishes the seriousness of the crime, but it helps to understand that there is a difference between premeditation and destructive impulsiveness. The third profile is even darker, the avenger. This is the father or mother who uses their child as a weapon to hurt their ex-partner. If I can't have them, you won't have them either. It's a possessive mentality, a desire for absolute control. John List, for example, killed his wife, mother, and 3 children because, in his mind, they were bringing shame to the family. It was a form of punishment, of revenge against what he considered moral failings. These criminals see their children not as individuals, but as extensions of themselves, as objects that can be destroyed to inflict pain on the other. The fourth profile is that of the unwanted child. Here, the child is seen as an obstacle, a burden, something preventing the father or mother from living the life they desire. It could be a new relationship, it could be financial freedom, it could simply be the desire to avoid responsibilities. Diane Downs shot her own 3 children because her lover didn't want children. Simple as that. Cold as that. These cases are marked by a level of selfishness and emotional coldness that shocks even the most experienced investigators. And lastly, the fifth profile, the rarest and perhaps the most disturbing of all, the sadist. This is the father or mother who kills for pleasure, for control, for power. Josef Fritzl imprisoned his own daughter in the basement for 24 years, repeatedly abused her, and had children with her. It wasn't a breakdown. It wasn't psychosis. It was a conscious, planned choice, sustained for decades. These cases are the most difficult to process because there is no distorted logic, no attempt at justification. There is only pure evil. Now comes the most important part of everything I'm going to tell you today. Because here's something few people know, something that can truly make the difference between life and death for a child. These crimes are almost never pure impulse. They don't happen out of nowhere, like a bolt of lightning. There are signs. There are always signs. And if you know how to read those signs, if you know what to look for, you can literally save a life. I'm not exaggerating. I'm giving you real prevention tools. The first sign, and perhaps the clearest, is progressive social isolation. The person begins to distance themselves from everyone. They cancel appointments, stop answering calls, refuse visits. When someone offers help, they say everything is fine, that they can handle it alone, but you realize they can't. They build a wall around themselves and the children, and the more this isolation progresses, the more dangerous it becomes. Because when there are no witnesses, when there is no one around to notice the mental deterioration, tragedy finds room to grow. Another extremely serious sign is comments about weight, burden, or phrases that begin with, "It would be better if." When you hear someone say, "My child would be better off dead," or "I can't take it anymore," or "Sometimes I think about ending it all," this isn't a common venting session. This isn't passing tiredness. These are giant red flags. They are cries for help disguised as loose phrases, and most people ignore them because they don't want to believe that someone close to them might be thinking something like that. But ignoring it doesn't make the danger disappear. It only makes it grow silently. There is also contradictory behavior towards the child. It's either extreme neglect, visible disregard, a total lack of attention and basic care, or it's the complete opposite, obsessive, irrational overprotection, where the father or mother doesn't let anyone get close, doesn't trust anyone, and acts as if the whole world is a threat. Both extremes are signs that something is wrong, because balance is what we expect from a healthy caregiver. Extremes indicate a lack of control. A history of untreated mental disorders is another critical factor. Postpartum depression that was ignored, psychosis that was minimized, previous episodes that were swept under the rug. When these conditions are left untreated, they don't go away. They accumulate, they worsen, and at some point, they explode. Andrea Yates attempted suicide twice before killing her children. Twice. The signs were there, but no one acted with the necessary urgency. And perhaps the most dangerous sign of all, a complete lack of support network. When there's no one to share the burden, when there's no one to offer a breather, to lend a hand, to realize that the person is at their limit, the mind can collapse. Raising one child is already challenging. Raising several children alone, without emotional, financial, or psychological support, can be devastating. And when the brain is extremely exhausted, functioning at its absolute limit, it can break down. And when it breaks down, what comes next can be irreversible. If you notice these signs in someone close to you, don't ignore them. Don't wait for them to ask for help. Often, they won't. Early intervention, whether offering direct support or connecting the person with mental health professionals, can prevent a tragedy. It can save not only a child's life, but also that of an adult who is losing their way. And now that you know how to identify the signs, let me show you how this works in practice with a case that has become a symbol of the coldest manipulation you can imagine. If Andrea Yates represents the extreme of psychosis and twisted madness, Chris Watts represents the opposite extreme. And perhaps that's why his case is even more disturbing. Because there was no illness, there were no hallucinations, there were no voices, there was only an ordinary man who decided that family was a problem that needed to be eliminated. And he did it with a coldness that chilled the entire world. August 2018, Colorado. Chris Watts was 33 years old, worked for an oil company, was married to Shanann, who was pregnant with their third child, and had two young daughters, Bella, 4, and Celeste, 3. On the outside, again, everything seemed perfect. Shanann posted on social media about her family, her marriage, how happy they were. But Chris had a secret. He was having an affair with a co-worker, and he wanted to start a new life. No wife, no children, no responsibilities. In the early morning of August 13th, Chris killed Shanann. He strangled his pregnant wife in the bed where they slept. And then, with her body still warm upstairs, he went to his daughter's room. Bella and Celeste woke up. They saw their father, and he suffocated them both one by one. Bella, the older one, begged. She said, "Daddy, please." I said, "I don't want to die." And he continued, until she stopped breathing. Then he did the same to Celeste. Chris threw the girls' bodies into oil tanks at the company where he worked. He buried Shanann's body in a shallow grave on the same property. And then, as if nothing had happened, he went home, took a shower, and waited. When Shanann's friend realized she wasn't answering messages and went to the house, Chris feigned surprise, he feigned concern. He called the police. He said he had left for work in the morning, and when he returned, his wife and daughters weren't there. And the most shocking thing, he went on TV. He gave an interview. He made an emotional appeal, looking directly at the camera, saying, "Shanann, if you're seeing this, please come home. I just want you both back." He played the role of a desperate husband, a terrified father, and meanwhile, his daughters' bodies were submerged in oil, and his wife was buried just a few kilometers away. The police were immediately suspicious, because Chris wasn't a good actor. He was mechanical, robotic, disconnected, and when confronted with the evidence, he confessed. But his confession was perhaps the most terrifying part of all. When asked why he had done it, why he had killed his own daughters, Chris said with terrifying simplicity, "I don't know. I just wanted them to disappear." There was no psychosis. There was no depression. There was no mental condition that justified what he did. Chris Watts simply saw his family as an obstacle. And when you see people as obstacles, as things that stand in the way of the life you want, killing becomes an option. That's the profile of the unwanted child. Absolute coldness, calculated planning, zero empathy, and this total absence of emotional connection leads us to an even deeper question. How can someone completely switch off empathy? How does someone manage to switch off the instinct to protect and activate the instinct to destroy? How does a father look at his own son and see not a person, but a problem to be solved? The answer lies in a psychological mechanism called emotional dissociation. And understanding this is understanding how monsters are created, not by divine choice or pure genetics, but by a mental process that any human brain, under the right conditions, can execute. Emotional dissociation is when the brain either to protect itself from something unbearable or as a conscious strategy, simply shuts off the emotional connection with another person. It's as if you put an invisible barrier between yourself and that human being, transforming them into something else, into a symbol, into an object, into an obstacle. And when you do that, when you remove the other person's humanity, everything changes, because empathy depends on connection, and without connection, killing becomes mechanical. In Andrea Yates's case, the dissociation occurred due to psychosis. She wasn't choosing to dehumanize her children. Her brain was so broken, so out of touch with reality, that the children ceased to be Noah, John, Paul, Luke, and Mary. They became souls. They became abstract concepts that needed to be saved. She didn't see their eyes, didn't hear their voices, didn't feel their skin beneath her own hands. She was operating in a completely different dimension, where the act of drowning was, in her distorted logic, an act of redemption. But in Chris Watts' case, the dissociation was strategic. He didn't go crazy. He trained his own mind. And that's what makes his case so frightening. Because Chris needed to convince himself that Bella and Celeste weren't his daughters. They were problems. They were obstacles between him and the life he wanted. And to do that, he began to distance himself emotionally. He stopped looking into their eyes with affection. He stopped seeing them as extensions of himself. He began to see them as burdens. And the more he repeated this narrative in his own head, the easier it became to accept the idea of eliminating them. Psychopaths do this naturally. They are born with a neurological inability to feel empathy in the same way that ordinary people do. But here's the disturbing point. Ordinary people can also learn to dissociate. Soldiers are trained for it. Enforcers in authoritarian regimes are conditioned for it. And criminals like Chris Watts discover this on their own. Because when you disconnect emotionally, when you turn a person into a thing, killing ceases to be an act of violence against someone you love and becomes just a task. It becomes logistics. It becomes a solved problem. And that's exactly where the monster is born. Not in a moment of explosive rage, not in a psychotic episode, but in the silence of the mind that decides, coldly and calculatingly, that that life no longer matters, that that child, that son, that daughter is disposable. And when you reach that point when empathy has been completely switched off, the physical act of killing becomes almost banal. Chris suffocated his daughters as if switching off a machine. Andrea drowned her sons as if performing a sacred ritual. Different motivations, but the mechanism is the same. The complete disconnection between the aggressor and the victim. And this brings us to the final question. What does society do with these people after the crime happens? So, what happens to these people after the crime is committed? What does the justice system do when faced with someone who has killed their own child? The answer hinges on a very fine yet extremely important line: intentionality and awareness of reality. And it is here that the paths of Andrea Yates and Chris Watts diverge completely. Andrea was tried in 2002. Initially, she was sentenced to life imprisonment. The jury did not accept the insanity plea. They believed she knew what she was doing, knew it was wrong, and therefore should be punished, like any murderer. But in 2006, after an appeal that brought to light more evidence about her mental state, the conviction was overturned. Andrea was deemed not criminally responsible due to insanity and sent to a psychiatric hospital in Texas, where she remains to this day. She will never leave. But she is not in prison either. She is undergoing treatment, because the system finally recognized that she did not have control over her own mind at the time of the crime. Chris Watts, on the other, and received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. 5 consecutive sentences, 1 for each victim: Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and the 2 children Shanann was carrying. He will die in prison. And unlike Andrea, no one argued insanity in his favor, because there was nothing to argue. Chris knew exactly what he was doing. He planned it. He executed it. He lied. He faked it. Every step was conscious, deliberate, calculated. The difference between the 2 cases is brutal but essential. Andrea was ill. Chris was calculating. Andrea lost touch with reality. Chris never did. He simply decided that his reality was more important than the lives of his own daughters. And the justice system, at least in this aspect, managed to identify the difference. But here lies the problem. The point that society insists on not understanding. Punishing after the crime has happened changes nothing. It doesn't bring the children back. It doesn't undo the tragedy. It's merely a response to the damage already done. Society wants punishment, not understanding. It wants revenge, not prevention. It wants to see the criminal imprisoned, convicted, erased from existence. And look, I understand. When you hear what Andrea did, when you see the images of Chris on TV blatantly lying, anger comes naturally. The desire for justice comes naturally. But reactive justice doesn't save lives. It only counts bodies. And as long as we continue to ignore the signs, as long as we continue to treat mental health as a trivial matter, as something a person simply needs to overcome, as long as we continue to isolate mothers and fathers in situations of extreme vulnerability without a support network, more children will die at the hands of those who should protect them. Because the real crime, the crime we don't talk about enough, isn't just the final act. That's everything we ignore beforehand. It's the cries for help that were minimized. It's the signs that were dismissed. It's the interventions that never happened because someone thought it wasn't serious enough, that it would pass, that it was just a phase. And then comes the tragedy, and then comes the headline, and then everyone asks, how could this happen? But the truth is, it happened because we allowed it, because we chose not to watch until it was too late. And that's the darkest lesson these cases have to teach. Filicide isn't about pure evil. It's not about demonic beings born with an irreparable flaw in their souls. It's about collapse. It's about the exact point where the human mind breaks down and reality becomes something else. It's about the moment when the line between protection and destruction completely disappears, and what remains is only emptiness, distorted logic, calculated coldness, or overwhelming psychosis. And if there's one thing all these cases teach us, it's that none of them happened without warning. Some kill because they've gone insane. Andrea Yates drowned her children because her mind suffered a complete biochemical collapse. She wasn't evil. She was broken. Others kill because they never had empathy. Chris Watts suffocated his daughters because they were obstacles. He didn't go insane. He simply chose. He prioritized his own comfort over the lives of two innocent children. Opposite motivations, identical results. But all these cases, from Andrea to Chris, from delusional altruistic mothers to vengeful fathers, all have one thing in common. Someone, at some point, could have seen the signs. Andrea attempted suicide twice. She was hospitalized. She had a diagnosis. Doctors warned her. But no one acted with the necessary urgency. Chris distanced himself emotionally from his family weeks before the crime. Shanann noticed. She told friends that something was wrong, that he was different, but no one imagined that the difference was so profound, so lethal. And this repeats itself in almost every filicide case you study. The signs were there. The red flags were waving, but they were ignored, minimized, dismissed as exaggeration, as drama, as a passing phase. And that is the darkest lesson of all. Evil doesn't spring from nothing. It doesn't appear suddenly, like a storm without warning. It grows in silence, in denial, in inaction. It feeds on our reluctance to believe that someone close to us could be capable of this. It strengthens every time someone says everything is fine, when it clearly isn't. It expands every time we treat mental health as a trivial matter. Every time we isolate vulnerable people. Every time we ignore cries for help because they are inconvenient, because they require time, because they require us to leave our comfort zone. Preventing filicide isn't about paranoid surveillance of everyone. It's about being present. It's about creating real support networks, not just empty words on social media. It's about taking seriously when someone says they're struggling. It's about pushing for accessible psychiatric treatment, adequate maternity leave, and public policies that understand that raising a child alone, without structure, without rest, without help, can break anyone's mind. It's about understanding that no one is immune. Not you, not me, not the seemingly perfect family next door. Because in the end, these cases aren't just about the murderers. They're about all of us. About how we choose to see or not see. About how we decide to act or remain still. About how we deal with vulnerability, mental illness, silent cries for help, And if there's one thing I want you to take away from this video, it's this. You have power. The power to perceive. The power to act. The power to save a life. But only if you choose not to ignore it. If you've made it this far, it's because this type of content resonates with you. And if it does, subscribe to the channel. Because every week I bring you a new case, a new analysis, always dissecting the psychology behind crimes that most people prefer not to look at closely. And hey, leave a comment below saying I made it to the end. I read them all, I swear. And that shows me that you're really engaged, that you want to continue this conversation. If this video made you think, if it made you see these crimes in a different light, leave a like. This helps the algorithm bring this content to more people who also want to understand, not just judge. And there's a video here that complements this topic. Click and continue with me there. We'll delve into another case that will make you question even more what you thought you knew about human nature. Thanks for staying until the end. See you next time.